A lot of people believe that if the alleged victim tells the DA that they don't want to press charges, the case will go away. But that is not how it works. The reality is that the victim has no control over whether charges are filed, the DA does. And if the victim tries to change their story on their own, the DA often assumes that they are lying to protect the defendant. In some cases, the DA sees this as a red flag for ongoing abuse and becomes even more aggressive and even more inclined to file more serious charges. So let's get into an example of how this can play out. Jake and Blake have been together for 5 years. One night after a very stressful day, they get into an argument at home. Voices are raised. Blake pushes Jake's shoulder. Jake pushes back. At that moment, their roommate walks in, sees Blake stumble backward, panics, and calls 911. When the police arrive, Blake tells the officers it's fine, it was just an argument. But the officers see a potential domestic violence case, so they arrest Jake on the spot. The next day, Blake feels awful and wants to fix things. Blake thinks,
if I just explain to the DA that I don't want to press charges, they'll drop it. I'll tell them I started it so that they know Jake is innocent.
But here's how this backfires. When Blake calls the DA's office and says, I don't want to press charges, they assume that Blake is being pressured or manipulated into dropping the case. And instead of helping Jake, Blake's call gets the case flagged as evidence of ongoing abuse. Second, Blake accidentally strengthens the case. Realizing that this phone call isn't getting anywhere and not realizing that she's making it worse, Blake writes a letter to the DA explaining what happened. In the letter, Blake says, I started it. I pushed Jake first. To Blake, this sounds like she's taking responsibility. But to the DA, it's proof that a physical altercation happened. So what should Jake and Blake have done instead? Jake should have hired a lawyer immediately. And if Blake wanted to help, then she should have gone through a defense attorney to make sure that whatever statements she was going to make aren't actually going to make the case worse. Jake and Blake are flying blind here. The fact that Jake got arrested in the first place is probably a complete shock to them and to most people before they realize how this system works. So the bottom line is, if the alleged victim wants to help, they need to go through the right legal channels, through a legal filter, not contact the DA and make things worse.